everyone, it's Hannah and Cailin, back again with Double Talk. I'm Hannah.
And I'm Cailin. If it seems like problems with sleep is the talk of every town, there's a good reason.
According to sleepfoundation.org, almost half of all Americans say they feel sleepy during the day, between 3 and 7 days per week. 35.2% of all adults in the US report sleeping on average for less than 7 hours per night.
But what should we actually do on those nights when there's a lot on our minds and sleep just won't come? Today we are catching up with sleep specialist and neurologist Chris Winter about the myths surrounding sleeplessness. Listen in.
I want to start by asking you, once and for all, Chris, please settle this. How many hours of sleep per night does an adult need?
It's a great question. So the average adult needs about 8 hours, but that's the average. So there are people who actually require less, but there's actually individuals who need more. So it's sort of like how many calories do you need to eat? It's kind of the same question. Maybe the average adult, I'm making this up, 2,200 calories. But if you're a distance runner or if you're fairly sedentary, depending on your metabolism, your body size, that can all change. And sleep's kind of like that too.
I know a lot of people, like, if they stay up really late the night before, they have like a crazy week at work or any number of things. When it's the weekend and they have that chance to sleep in, they can sleep till like noon or something like that, like you mentioned. And then they say, a lot of times people say, oh, I must have needed it. Is that true? Because I know for me personally, sometimes if I sleep in too late, I feel horrible for the rest of the day. But even if I needed sleep that night, it's still like, is there like a threshold where you can't go too under, but you can't go too over?
I think the right answer is tough. The right answer is probably, we have two sort of competing things going on. We've got our schedule that we want to keep relatively consistent, but then we also have the amount of sleep that we want to hit. And one of the things I like to tell people is think of your sleep like a credit card. If you're somebody who needs 8 hours, you're the average individual. You can kind of think of yourself as needing 56 hours a week instead of 8 a day. So let's say tonight you go to the midnight screening of Top Gun Maverick or whatever because you really want to see it, and you get home late, but you got to go to work the next day, and you fall short of your 8 hours. So what I like to say is that you've got 6 days to make up for the 4 hours or whatever that you lost. So over the next 6 days, you've got to get your 8 hours plus find a few additional hours to make up for the night of the movie. So I think that those are the kinds of things we sort of wrestle with. I think it's sort of impractical to think that we're always going to get a perfect 8 hours of sleep every night, but we want to be cognizant of it, that when we can get it, we get it. But when we can't, we have a plan to make up for it, either sleeping a little bit on the weekend, taking a nap. I always tell people, if you can get up at your normal time, get up, walk your dog, get a little something to eat, see some sunshine, and then maybe take a nap a little bit later on. So you keep that morning routine consistent, but you're also making up the sleep that you've lost.
That's so interesting to kind of think of it on a weekly basis rather than a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, no, I think that, the sleep debt people argue about all the time. And I think that, if week in and month out, you are constantly shortchanging your sleep when you're young, you can do it. But I do think that there's a health consequence to pay. But if we think about accruing a debt, but paying it off relatively short, like a credit card that has, no fees for a month, and then, bad things happen with the debt you accrue on it. If you think of your sleep credit card, that nothing bad happens for a week, that's probably a good way to think about paying off debt.
It seems like everyone these days is just stressed out of their minds, which makes it difficult to sleep a lot of times. What advice would you give for falling and staying asleep when you have a lot on your mind?
Sleep is sort of like, it's like an athletic event. It's sort of like shooting basketball or something that, the more pressure you put on yourself to make the shot, it can start to change the way you actually approach it. And I think sleep's very much like a performance and that you can have when you put yourself under a lot of stress. I've got to sleep well tonight or else the presentation I'm doing tomorrow will not be good, or the film I'm working on is not going to be great. I think you run into trouble. What I like to have patients or clients or athletes really focus on is what you can control. And the first thing you control is going to bed. So it's 9 o'clock where I'm at right now, and I think where you are too. And if your bedtime's 11, you can control that. You can stay off your phone and stay off, the next episode of I'm watching, Love on the Spectrum, and I'm kind of obsessed with it now.
That's a great show.
So I'm going to cut myself off when it's time to go to bed and not watch another episode of whatever.
That is a great show.
Control. The second thing, I think that we really undervalue the power of resting. So there's this idea that if you get into bed and you don't fall asleep quickly, that it's a problem or it's wasted time, versus if you're in a dark room and your eyes are closed and you're relaxed and you're thinking about your significant other or something that's really positive in your life, that's really restorative. And so I think that, I really try to get people to focus on resting and not so much sleeping, because we can always rest. I mean, if I close my eyes and put my feet up, I can literally rest as we talk on this podcast. Sometimes sleep is a little bit more elusive. And that's the reason why I call my newest book, The Rested Child, just because I think that when we're young and we deal with young people, we want to sort of build up the idea that resting is extremely positive for your body. And if it takes you 30 minutes or an hour to fall asleep, if you're resting properly, that can be a very beneficial time for us. And once we get out from under that, I've got to do well, I've got to fall asleep faster, bad things will happen, things tend to do much better.
Say you do get like 4 or 5 hours of sleep in a night and you have work the next day. How much does it affect your thinking and your performance at work? I'm not saying long term, but like for a night or two of no sleep, how much does that really affect you the next day?
There's a lot of evidence that basically says that even after a couple nights of restricted sleep, there are both physical and mental effects. I mean, it's something like after 3 nights of restricted sleep, your maximum bench press drops by like 20 pounds, and you're likely to make 3 times more mental errors than you would if you had good sleep. So it's really a balance. And I really think of these people on sort of a spectrum. There is the individual who's so terrified they're not going to get the right amount of sleep that they really struggle and put themselves under a tremendous amount of pressure to fall asleep, which has sort of dire consequences. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's somebody, I always call her Jenny Trauma Surgeon. And it's from meeting people who were trauma surgeons when I was a doctor, that they have this belief that when you talk to them, that as long as they get an hour of sleep on call, that they can successfully take your spleen out, no problem. Like, there's this kind of almost military-like mentality that I don't need sleep, I can do without it. And some people genetically are programmed to be better able to cope with sleep deprivation than others. It doesn't mean that they're operating on their A game, but they can do it. I mean, Jenny, trauma surgeon, can probably take your spleen out after only getting an hour of sleep when she's on call in the hospital. So we always want to strike that balance of, we always want to be at our best and our healthiest, and that requires great sleep. But we don't want to be terrified if something happens to kind of knock us off our sleep game. It's no different than, I love to eat. I love to eat dinner. I love to go to great places and eat, and it's so much fun, and have other people who really are passionate about cooking cook. But that doesn't mean I've never skipped a lunch before in my life. And when lunch rolls around and you don't feel that hungry and you skip it, you don't panic. You don't think, my God, what's going on? I'm not eating lunch. I need to take a pill to fix this problem. It's not a problem. It's sometimes our bodies don't really want food, and sometimes they're not really ready for sleep. So we always want to have a plan for when we go to bed and sleep doesn't happen right away, that we relax and understand that's all part of the bigger plan, that getting in bed and falling asleep in 5 minutes is not something that's going to happen for us every night.
You don't want to lose sleep over losing sleep, is what I'm getting.
That's exactly right.
As a sleep specialist, what myths about sleep just drive you crazy?
There's a lot of myths, and we've already covered one, the 8-hour myth. And that's fine if you need 8 hours, but if you're one of the people out there who needs 7, especially if you're the 7 and you've married the 8 or the 9, and you both go to bed, they're fine because they need that time, and you're sitting there kind of twiddling your thumbs. So that 8-hour myth that everybody needs 8 hours can actually sort of harm people who need less. Like, they're really trying to get the 8, but they were never able to do that. It's sort of being genetically able to eat an entire pizza. If your buddies all order an entire pizza and eat it, and you're like, well, I guess I'll do the same thing, and you order a pizza and you only eat half, is that a medical problem? No, it's really just your expectation was wrong. So stop hanging out with a bunch of football players and understand what you need to eat to feel your best. I think the other myth and piece of advice that I really don't like is if you get in bed and you haven't fallen asleep in like 15 minutes, you should get up and go do something.
People do say that. Is that not true?
Well, I mean, it's fine. So here are my problems with it. Number one, it's never fun to sort of get in bed and like program a 15-minute timer and then sit there and, like, oh God, I've only got 12 minutes left before I need to be asleep. Or, so I don't think anybody does well under stress of time. It's like taking a test and you kind of lose yourself in the SAT and all of a sudden the proctor says you have 5 minutes.
That was me.
So you're like, so it's never good. So I don't like the time. So what I would say is, if you get in bed and it's taking you longer to fall asleep than you would like, that's part A. And then part B is you're frustrated by it. Sure, get up and go do something. That's perfectly fine. But if you're actually in bed and your eyes are closed and you're sitting there thinking about some awesome memory or something you're going to plan for a friend for their birthday and you're happy in bed, awake, then I would say stay there until you're not. That's really the definition of insomnia. It's not a person who can't sleep. It's a person who's not sleeping when they want to, and they're worried about it. So they're kind of stressing about sleep. So it's almost like insomnia is not an inability to sleep. Everybody sleeps. It's impossible not to sleep. It's the fear of not sleeping. And so when that gets in people's minds and it creates upset, anxiety, stress, worry, that's where the problem is. So if somebody says, I meet somebody at a dinner party, hey, how long does it take you to fall asleep? If they said, I don't know, 2 hours, my first question would be, how does that make you feel? If the answer is, oh, I'm perfectly fine. I like being awake for an hour or two before I fall asleep. It doesn't bother me one bit. They'll probably never have, insomnia the way we think about it. You have to dread it or hate it for it to work.